3 counties, 24 cities, working together, accomplishing more than any of us could alone. Three counties. Whether your roots run generations deep, working together, or you recently more than any of us could alone. You are a part of Metro, the nation's only regional government. 3 counties, elected by the people. Whether your roots run preserving what we love. Let's keep our region thriving for decades to come.
Hello, I'm Rory. You may have seen me at my desk as you came into
Preserving what we love. Let's keep our
engagement, you mute that, an engagement, public engagement process that's part of it, where we're seeking not just research, book research, desk research, expert interviews, but also lived experience of people in this place. So another part of the team that's led by Gensler is engaging in that. What we get to do today is really ground in and develop a shared vocabulary around strategic foresight for the first 90 minutes or so. That's going to be pretty interactive. We're literally going to get up out of our seats at a couple points. There is plenty of opportunity to hear from the voices in the room because we want to understand what are you seeing about the future from where you sit, and to calibrate to that. So that's the first 90 minutes or so. And then we'll close with just a sneak peek, a preview into where the early research trailheads are taking us in terms of the inquiries that will continue to develop between now and October. So that's kind of where we're headed. And we can get started here. I think it's important, any person who's a good futurist is also a student of history. So we begin by looking back in order to look forward. And the 50-year time horizon is hard for all of us as humans to kind of calibrate to, even if you're in charge of long-range planning or have a lot of familiarity with that. And so it might help just to think about what was life like 50 years ago, if we think about the year 1976. So I'm an outsider to this region. I'm a student of the region, so check me if any of these are not quite right. But thinking of 50 years ago, the present day, at least the present day version of Metro had not yet been created by voters. So the whole agency convening us for this conversation today was not yet in place. We know that the demographics of the state were very different. 2.4 million people roughly in Oregon, and that the census counted the state as more than 97% white at that moment, with Black residents barely above 1%, Latinos under 2%, and more. And today, of course, there are more than 4 million people. And if you think of the racial composition, about a quarter of the people are people of color. So even more so for this metro region. A lot has changed in those last 50 years. As I understand it, Nike was here, but was going by a different name in 1976. Blue Ribbon Sports is what I've been told. Intel had just bought its first land in Oregon 2 years prior. If you think Bob's Mill would begin 2 years later, so that wasn't quite here yet, and it would be another 23 years for Stumptown Coffee and a number of other brands that you might think of as part of the identity of this place. Elsewhere, not here obviously, but Apple was founded in the year 1976. So if you think of just those early days of the personal computer and the whole trajectory that has set in motion, all of that was in the nascent stages at that point. If you zoom out, I've talked to a couple of you who are in federal affairs in this room. So if you zoom out to the national level, the average retail price for gas nationwide was 53 cents a gallon in 1976. And the US was only 2 years into, you could take any policy here, it's interesting to look 50 years back. I looked at the Equal Credit Opportunity Act for women, that women could take out a credit card or a line of credit in their own names. That was only 2 years into execution. And also in 1976, Congress was starting to expand that law to bar credit discrimination along a number of other factors, by race, by religion, by national origin. So we were that early in it. And the farmland protection system was newly in force. The wine industry, if you think of all these trajectories that we see playing out half a century later, these were all just very early. So as we think about 50 years into the future, we're really, for this project, which will complete next year, so 2027, we're thinking about the year 2077. And it helps to calibrate to how much change can happen in that kind of time frame. Also looking back, I want to offer this book. It was from the 70s, if you can't tell from the font that's here on the left-hand side. This book, Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, who at the time was observing the rapid technological and social changes that were very difficult for people to absorb. Felt like the future was coming faster and faster. And in his analysis, he described this feeling, this experience, as something that's very akin to culture shock if you're going to a place that you haven't been or you're culturally unmoored, unfamiliar with. So he analyzed culture shock and thought, well, we're experiencing future shock. And what I want to offer today and what I see in the Future 50 process is the antidote that he called for, which is, at its best, we can try to create sanctuaries for social imagination. And this means, a time set apart to try to feel like you're in kind of a little bit higher ceilinged room and thinking about the future. It's social by design. So there are many strands of engagement in this, including a youth advisory committee. I got to meet 4 of them just last week in this room. Artists that are engaged in this and others. So the social combinatorial process is really key here. And it's imaginative. And we don't often, when we're triaging everything in the present, it's a rare opportunity to really get to imagine 50 years in the future. So this is what, when I hold in my mind what we're trying to contribute to the process, it's to hold some space for a sanctuary for social imagination. Please.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. I'm Malou Wilkinson. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning, Development, and Research, and I'm just jumping in because we are missing our Future 50 project manager, Jess Deb, and she was going to give a little bit of context. And so we went really quickly from Councillor Wong to Rachel, and I just wanted to give a little bit of context as to why we have you all here today, councilors and members of the leadership of Metro. And then I think Councillor Lewis, as one of the members of the Future Vision Commission, wants to just add a little bit of context as well. So I'm sorry, Rachel, I was trying to figure out the right place to jump in. So we asked, you might remember, many of you were here in this room in October when we had Tracy Haddon-Lowe come and talk about regionalism and have some kind of brainstorming and work together with the council and members of SLT. And that's what we're working to recreate here again. The future vision, our vision for the next 50 years is not just a planning, development, and research element of Metro. It is really for everyone. It's not just for Metro, it is for the region. And we really, it's really important to us that you all are involved throughout the process. And so we're super excited to have Rachel from Institute for the Future here today to lead us through this, this work session. And often IFTF takes I don't know, it's more than a day, of 3 days of time to get people trained in this Foresight mindset. You all are going to have 2 hours, really? So it's not very long, but just the taste of it, I think, is really helpful for us all to have that in our heads as you're thinking about what our future vision update might mean to the work that you do at Metro. So I think that's enough from me. Councillor Lewis, would you like to add? And then we'll turn it back over to Rachel.
Yeah, sure. I'll just briefly hop in. I've been in at least 3 sessions facilitated by Rachel as part of the Future Vision Commission. And I could say a lot more about Rachel, but she already did a little thumbnail of who she is. And she's situated very much coming into this world, not always working with government, or in fact, maybe rarely working with government. And I do think that so much of the skills she brings is helping us peel back where community interest is and where community connects with structures like governance or structures like neighborhood or familial connection. And I just really hope that we lean into that today. I think we have a lot of really solid community engagement practices here. We are very good as an agency at being connected to community, but Rachel can help us define community and can really kind of get us out of the tropes and the mindsets that we're in. So I look forward to this.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. And just, I'm hoping that you all can enjoy this little bit of time to be thinking about both what things were like 50 years ago, what we want it to be like in the future, and how we can all work together to get there.
Thank you so much. No, helpful context. I really appreciate it. Thank you both for that. So that's why we're here. So now, as we continue just looking back to prime our imaginations to be thinking forward, this is a report from Institute for the Future back in 1971 by Paul Barron, one of our co-founders. He was one of the inventors of packet switching, the kind of foundational technology behind the internet. I see some tech geeks in the room. I love it. So this was looking at high capacity communication infrastructure back when we used to produce white papers like this. And we were envisioning at the time in 1971 what people might do with this high capacity connection that they had. And the research team was imagining, well, maybe we would have shopping transactions where we would have store catalogs that are highly customized in real time to the types of things that any one individual is interested in, which we now can see play out in some of the kind of signals of change in the present. We were imagining maybe there would be person-to-person work, kind of tasks that are routed between people differently, maybe even work from home, envisioned in 1971. And perhaps we might not go out to some sort of movie theater or production studio to seek out plays and movies and performances. Maybe we might have a video library of those that would come to us in our homes. That if we had this excess capacity, what would people actually do with it? So these futures, some of them in 1971, I was not yet with the Institute at that point. I joined in 2008. But some of them seemed a little bit like ridiculous futures at the time. You know, like, well, how would we get there? And why would anyone want to do that? But there's a saying in Foresight that any useful statement about the future should at first appear ridiculous. Any useful statement about the future should at first appear ridiculous. If we're not starting to envision things that feel a little bit, you know, vulnerable at the edge, then we're probably not thinking far out enough. And particularly in this project with the future vision, looking 50 years out, it's important to keep that in mind. I mentioned I first joined the Institute for the Future in 2008. And at the time, we were engaged in what you see on the left here, a project that we called Superstruct. We were envisioning 5 different scenarios, research-based scenarios, about some of the kind of super threats that we might face at a species level, looking 10 years ahead. So we were working on it in 2008. 2009, we came out with this 10-year provocation. And you can see the range of them here. We were looking at food systems. We were looking at geopolitics with power struggle. The one on the top was envisioning a global respiratory pandemic. So we didn't call it COVID. We called it respiratory distress syndrome. So it was nicknamed REDS. And we were imagining, what if this were to happen? It's not going anywhere. It may last for years. What would you do differently if this future were to come to pass? And this was actually what the genre of real play games. So this was an online game. We asked people, okay, watch this research-driven video scenario, and then think, what would you do differently? And share with us what actions you think you would take. And I remember, it's so formative for me being new to the Institute. I remember, one person saying, well, if it's respiratory, then I would need something to cover my face probably to be safe. So I think I have these like paint masks in the garage from an old project. Maybe I would dig those out for myself, for my family. Another person played the tape through a bit further and said, well, if it's a respiratory pandemic and people can't move around, logistics would break, supply chains would break. Maybe I wouldn't have a mask. How would I? And posted a picture of himself with a red bandana covering his face. I remember another person, a mother, who, and it gives me chills now to think about it, who said, wait a minute, my children would not be able to go to school in this kind of scenario. Would they be at home with me? And how would I be working? And, all of those scenarios. And our colleague who led this project, Jane McGonigal, when the most recent pandemic came to pass in 2020, she started noticing how many news stories, literally she started tally marks, how many news stories that she would see on TV or in the newspaper would say, XYZ has happened, unimaginable. The Met Gala was canceled, unimaginable. But in fact, these are imaginable futures. And so the endeavor we're trying to do with the research component of the Future 50 vision is to get us to imagine a broader array of plausible futures. This was a plausible future to imagine in 2008, 2009. We just need to look and see. And so the goal is to cultivate more future readiness for the sake of having done that. I need to pause and say, we don't think that anyone can predict the future with point accuracy, that X event will happen by Y date. The future is far too combinatorial and ambiguous. There are black swan events, so that to us is not the point of predicting the future. Rather, it's using these tools of strategic foresight to think about the future more creatively and more systematically, so that when we don't have all the answers, when we're facing uncertainty, we can still have some inspiration for action, still have a greater sense of agency, because we did imagine that a pandemic might be possible, 10 years before. So that's what it's not, but what is it? What is strategic foresight? This is our definition we've developed over the years. It's a set of tools, processes, and mindsets for developing strategy and making decisions under conditions of uncertainty. And the mindsets part here is perhaps the very hardest. I know you all lead organizations and teams and community and are community leaders, so you know anything that involves humans, the mindset part is the hardest thing to shift. So each of these is critically important in strategic foresight. So what we want to do today are three things. One, introduce strategic foresight, develop that shared vocabulary. We want to begin to cultivate a little more kind of peripheral vision into the drivers of change that you all are already tracking. We've gotten to do this with Counselor Lewis and with the Future Vision Commission themselves. We've done several rounds of trying to understand what drivers of change they're tracking. So this is a first chance to do that here. And then just to simply share some practical foresight habits that you could begin to apply. I want to do a speed round of introductions, starting with the counselors. You all know each other. I'm getting to know you, and invite you to introduce yourselves in a very particular way, leading with your curiosity. So here's the invitation. I'm a blank, asking questions about the future of blank. So the first one you might say, it could be your title, it could be a role that you hold, it could be a personal role that you play in life, and then your curiosity, asking questions about the future of whatever topic is really animating your curiosity right now. We won't hold you to these. We know that you're interesting and interested people. So if we asked at lunchtime, you might have a different topic than you have at this particular moment. But just to begin, again, get a sense of range in the room, hoping to, in a few minutes, starting with the counselors, go around the table to hear from each of you. So this is your cheat sheet. I'm going to say a few more words so you have time to think what you might want to do for this introduction. And here's a couple of examples we've heard recently. One person says, I'm an IT executive asking questions about the future of tech infrastructure at historically Black colleges and universities. Another might say, I'm a CIO asking questions about how climate change will impact my workforce. Or I'm a mother asking questions about how my 12-year-old will navigate disinformation and deepfakes in the future. So you could bring personal or professional. Okay, so there's the preview. A little bit more about Institute for the Future while you're noodling on that. We were originally founded in 1968, based in Palo Alto, California. So long-term interest in the nexus between technology and culture through those almost 60 years since then. We operate as a nonprofit, and our mission is to help organizations, communities, and leaders become future ready. So again, not about predicting the future. And we engage in original research, some tools in the Strategic Foresight Toolkit. So we, as Malou said, we teach strategic foresight. We have a Coursera futures thinking specialization. We do in-person, online, and brief introductions like we're doing today. And then we also have programs and convenings, bringing people together, usually cross-sector, as Councillor Lewis mentioned, some in government, but many outside of government, who are nevertheless trying to help navigate, their organizations and communities to a preferred future. We work across sectors, as I mentioned. So you see on the left some examples of large-scale philanthropies and some of the global scale and national scale nonprofits that we work with. We work with those who are in corporate, consumer packaged goods, financial services. You see some examples here. A lot in higher ed institutions. And then on the right, you can see some kind of more creative and strategic partners. So with governments, it's interesting, we have most often worked outside of the US, Finland, Singapore, some nation states have very strong foresight functions. In the US, we have often worked with things adjacent to intelligence and defense, which is where foresight, for better or worse, very much lives in a lot of practice in the United States. And we work with the US Conference of Mayors. So each year we train at South by Southwest. There's a group of mayors that gathers every year that rotates, and we train them in strategic foresight as well. But what I appreciate about working across sectors like this, and I think it's probably something that you counselors have to do all the time when you're facing a lot of different elements of interests in your community, is you really put that future year at the center. In our case, 2036 is what we're thinking about a lot right now at the Institute. And then you kind of walk around it from a number of perspectives. So what does a automobile manufacturer think about mobility in the year 2026? What changes are they seeing from where they sit? What about a municipal transit agency like SFMTA in the California context? What are they seeing about mobility in 2036? And then what about a retailer who's asking about the changing path to purchase in 2036? What do they think about mobility? So those different lenses, kind of fractal lenses on an inquiry, make it really rich. We have, as I mentioned, I am an outsider to this area. I live in California, but we have been honored to get to work in recent years with some organizations locally. I'll just share these two examples. 1803 Fund, that many of you are probably familiar with, who are really envisioning a rooted, prosperous future for Black Portland in particular. They have asked us to work across a little over a year with their inaugural cohort of grantees. So both their culture and their place grantees. And in that context, we've led day-long retreats and a panel as well on what drivers of change might impact a rooted, prosperous Black Portland looking 10 years ahead. So a focused inquiry. And there our role has been really to hold space for a community-based foresight envisioning of what a preferred future might be and what the kind of headwinds and tailwinds plausibly could be towards, advancing towards that future. So ultimately landing in a shared vision of a preferred future that's outside of each of those organizations. Take Albina Vision Trust, or if you look at the Music Archive, for example, they have their own mission statements, their own visions of the future, their own strategic plans. But 1803 Fund asked, how can we get to a shared vision of a preferred future that's outside of just those discrete mission statements? And then we've also worked recently with 1,000 Friends of Oregon here in this context. The team, Sam Diaz and the team there, asked us to conduct a horizon scan of drivers of change that might impact land use in particular in this statewide in Oregon. And this was part of an input into their 50th anniversary celebration. And then ultimately we created 4 alternative scenarios of how the future might play out 10 years from now. So that we don't hold just one vision of the future, but we can imagine discrete, differentiated futures and say, if this future were to come to pass, what would we do to get ready? If that other one were to come to pass, what would we do? So we held space then for their board and others to envision, what if this future were to come to pass? How would we, as 1,000 Friends of Oregon, communicate with our constituencies? What actions would we need to be taking? How would we staff ourselves to get ready for each of these 4 futures? So those are just a couple of examples where we are on a learning curve. We're learning this place and we're very early on that learning curve. But I wanted to give some texture because I think all of you have probably been a part or seen projects where you feel like you have a parachute researcher who kind of like drops in from outside, never to be seen again. And I just want to state that it's important to us to continue to web these relationships here. And that's already underway before this project. Okay, now we go to counselors first to ask you to introduce yourself using our formula. And I wonder, Counselor Lewis, if we could go to you first.
Sure. Christine Lewis, Metro Council District 2. And for this response, I'll say I am a big reader. Ask me questions about the future transfer of knowledge.
Reader asking questions about the transfer of knowledge. Thank you. Counselor Nolan, please.
Mary Nolan. We're sitting in the district I represent. They, them pronouns. I'm a parent asking questions about the authenticity of our commitment to racial equity and climate stewardship.
Parent asking questions about the authenticity of the relationship to racial equity and climate stewardship,
Of our commitment.
of the commitment to that,
Right.
the stewardship of the commitment to that.
Yep.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, hi, Duncan Wong, Metro Council District 6. And I'm in local government thinking about how local governments can survive and thrive with, rising authoritarianism and disinvestment.
So you're thinking you have futures of governance questions on your mind, yep, as it relates to local. Thank you. Please, Councilor Rosenthal.
Garrett Rosenthal, District 3, which is Southern Washington County. And I am thinking about the questions of whether the inbuilt hardwired genetic tendencies toward aggressiveness and competition will balance with our inbuilt tendencies toward empathy and coordination.
So these are questions of both science and human nature
Yes.
that you're asking. Thank you. Let's go. I don't know if it was clear that we were hoping to hear from staff as well. So I'm sorry if it wasn't because you're at the end.
Sort
But
of
we
figured it
can
might be, yeah.
Continue around.
Yeah, Andrew Scott. I'm a Deputy Chief Operating Officer, and I'm asking questions about whether if a continuing decline in trust in institutions, how that will affect government's ability to function.
Like half the mic here.
Sure. I'm Carrie McLaren. I'm the Metro Attorney. So as such, I'm an attorney asking questions about the future of the practice of law.
Sure, the practice of law. We should talk later. We have a forecast that's around the end of the insurance bargain, also around risk mitigation, looking 10 years ahead. That would be not fun to talk about, but important. Please.
Hi, Brian Kennedy. I'm the Chief Financial Officer asking questions about the financial sustainability of government.
Thank you.
So Mark, yeah. Hey, I'm Ryan Kinsella. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Director of Capital Asset Management, and I'm asking questions about how we plan and build infrastructure for the long term.
John Blasher, he, him, his pronouns. I'm Parks and Nature Director and father of twin boys. So as a tree hugger and parent, I'm asking questions about the future of tech and the online world and how that'll impact social connections and relationship with natural ecosystems.
Thank you. It's amazing how much you can drop into context very quickly in this kind of intro. Please.
Andy Shaw, Director of Government Affairs, use he and him pronouns. As a government nerd, I am thinking about the role of the private sector in governance versus the corporate sector and other arrangements in how we govern society.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Katie Hinches. I'm the Communications Director, and I am asking questions about how we build shared reality and shared values in a fractured media landscape and with the technology we have today.
Thank you. Please.
Doesn't bend.
It doesn't bend. Hi, my name is Samantha Corda. I am the Director of Risk, Readiness, and Resilience for Metro. So to be honest, I have an intelligence, defense, security background. So I'm often thinking about what could go wrong, but more importantly, I'm thinking about all the political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental impacts, both small and large, that could impact our organization, our people, our communities, and what we can do to mitigate or manage the risk or harm that could come from those, but also take advantage of opportunities that could derive from those things as well.
Thank you.
And I know I've spoken, but I hope no one here thinks that each of us only gets to ask one type of question.
Exactly. Yep. Thank you.
Cassie Porter, Deputy Director for Human Resources, and as an HR professional, I'm asking questions about how technology is going to change the way we do our work and what skills we're going to need for our future workforce.
And you have a lot of employees here. I have been learning. Okay, yes.
Good morning, Holly Calhoun, one of Metro's Deputy Chief Operating Officers, but as a parent, I am asking about the future of public education.
Catherine Chiarlo, Planning, Development, and Research Director here at Metro. I use she, her pronouns. And as a champion for cities, I am asking questions about how access to nature can make everyone's lives better in cities.
Hi, I'm Craig Stroud. I'm General Manager of Metro's Venues. Similar to Brian, I'm particularly concerned about how at the federal level we manage through our debt and how that the path to sustainability will impact all levels of government, all levels of society.
Thank you. We've heard from everyone at the table. I'm looking to Malou. Is that complete our round for now? Okay. Thank you for doing that. And again, we won't hold you to that one curiosity. I know you're interested and interesting people. Okay, we'll build now on a couple of kind of core definitions around strategic foresight. And this is, not probably going to be new to all of you, so I'm not suggesting that it is. It's rather just so we can develop that shared vocabulary. So for us in our practice over these decades, we see strategic foresight as a cycle, and this is really the core methodology: prepare, foresight, insight, action. It's a collaborative process. I've already mentioned it's a social endeavor. It's not something one goes off and does by themselves, although we do love science fiction writers and speculative fiction, and there is a real craft there. But the kind of strategic foresight that can be useful for organizations and decision makers in particular is a collaborative practice. And it begins with the prepared mind, just like any robust inquiry. This is where we gather our kind of building block evidence, our clues about how the future might be different. And we particularly look to drivers of change and signals of change, which are in your packet here and which we'll unpack as we go through today and get a little bit of practice in this. It's where we frame our future's questions. Sometimes asking the right question about the future is half the battle to having an actually generative conversation about how things might be different. And it's how we start to orient our minds to the next decade. What are our operating assumptions that are our starting point about particular topics and about our relationship to the future? So when done well, you ground in this part of the cycle. That moves then to foresight. And this is where we use our prepared evidence, our drivers of change and signals of change, to basically tell stories about the future that are plausible, provocative, they're internally consistent narratives and visions of how the future might be different. This could be in the form of, sometimes a very thick research report. Sometimes it's an artifact from the future, a visual that drops us into a scene from 2036, from 2077, and where you kind of immerse in that experiential future. Then you turn the corner to insight. And this is around generating meaningful implications, kind of so what for me, for my household, for my community, for the broader ecosystems that I care about. And I will say, I think, Malou, you mentioned earlier that when you think of Future 50, it's not a vision for Metro 50 years in the future. It really wants to be a vision of what might be happening in the external operating environment in which Metro is one actor, alongside of higher ed institutions as actors and businesses as actors locally. So in any good foresight process that's happening in a place, anchored in place, the prepare and foresight are kind of shared groundwork that you do. The insight is where things start to diverge, and it matters for whom we are asking about these implications. And then ultimately action. So this shouldn't be about navel gazing. It's not about like shiny futures, which some people get kind of trapped in an eddy around shiny futures, especially tech futures. Rather, it's about making better decisions in the present for the sake of having considered that long-term future, of having allowed ourselves to imagine what may otherwise feel unimaginable if we don't spend the disciplined time to do it. So I want to invite us to actually get up in just a moment and want to practice orienting to the future. This is in the prepare part of the toolkit. And I think we'll use, if we can come into this kind of center ring, we'll array ourselves along a spectrum here. And what I want to invite you to is I'm going to share a couple of prompts. We'll do 2 rounds of this. A prompt about how the future might be different. And it'll be a spectrum, and you'll kind of just vote with your feet, go to one part or the middle you may be drawn to, or one of the extremes. And the purpose of this is we want to help us develop a shared orientation around these topics very quickly. There's not time. We don't have the luxury of time to spend a lot of spinning of wheels about the future. So you have to figure out tricks for quickly surfacing assumptions that are shaping how we think about a particular topic. And this is one way of doing that. So I will invite you to stand, and we'll move into the center space. Here's our first prompt. Over the next decade, technology will bring us, if you think it's closer together, you're a 1, 2, or 3, you might kind of come along this side. If you're somewhere in the middle, or if you think over the next decade, technology will bring us further apart, you might find yourself over here. We're clumping. Yep. There we go.
It's fascinating. It's the 3 stories you told. The examples you gave from 76. All of those technologies brought people and isolated people where they used to gather to do those activities. Now they're isolated doing them.
So you're seeing, it's important to you, that history that you've observed those patterns. And so you can anticipate in the next decade, the Amazon, the Netflix, could cause more isolation. Let's look at, okay, hold on. I'm just taking stock really quickly. So if this is a 1, maybe this territory is like a 3, 4. There we go. Okay. All right, we found ourselves. It'll be faster the second time, I promise. Okay, so let's begin. Let's actually, thank you for that, just for grounding. We'll go to both polls, so I want to come back to this one as well. But I wonder, you placed yourself over here. You're not Pollyanna about it. You're not over here. But just for today, what caused you to place yourself here?
I'm thinking of randomly a World Cup commercial where it says the world is meant to meet. And I just think that we have been so divisive and destructive that there's a full circle spectrum where we're going to come back to realizing how much we need each other. That's my hope.
And so you're thinking of, when you think of technology, broadcast technology, like you might experience with the World Cup that's on right now, as an example of something that could have the potential to bring people closer together. So I appreciate this. Already we know a medium of technology that is important. We didn't stipulate what type of technology is important, but that's the one that came to mind for you.
Yeah, similar to what Holly was saying. I think it's people that brings us together, not the technology is just like that vehicle and medium. And I think with all the technological advancements that we've had, whether it's transportation or through communication, like people are able to get more connected now. Do we like how we are when we're together? Like maybe, maybe not, but I just think over time, like we'll have these ebbs and flows where it feels like we're divisive and torn apart. But with technology and some of those things, it does help bring us together and be able to communicate more. So.
Okay, thank you for those. Let's come back over here. So we're in the further apart side, and hear from you, Counselor, about why you found yourself here.
I think Craig made the point that drives me to be on the edge here, and that is that when we're thinking of technology, not necessarily how people use it, but the technology itself is driven by squeezing profit out of consumers, not in a way that is designed to convene people, but is actually designed to create divisions.
So in having a conversation about the future, it raises the importance of looking at capital flows, at values that get embedded in those technologies. So in the debate, you're complicating the debate about tech optimist, tech pessimist, neutral technology with the kind of follow the money and markets story. Yep. Thank you for that. And you named that you've already seen when we looked at those examples. Is there anything else that you wanted to add there, or another texture of why you found yourself here?
I think it's very interesting what people say and what people do, right? So while there's elements of capitalism in that, we also have how people choose to spend money, spend their time, and we say we want to gather, yet we do things in the opposite. And so if you look at how people are interacting, and I'm in the venue, like I'm in the gathering business, my whole world revolves around people gathering. But I don't see a lot of societal level shifts. I see, speaking to that, but people are voting with their actions. And so I think that the idea and the action are out of alignment with where people are.
Thank you. One of our 10-year forecasts that my colleague Ben Hamamoto is exploring right now is in 2036, the loneliness business is booming. Not for everyone. So if you were to disaggregate that by race, but there are certainly variances, but the business itself has market share, portion of market share that we think in that 10 years. Now we're talking 50 years in this project, right? But that's a 10-year forecast. Let's hear from you, and then we'll go just to the clump in the center. So just you're on watch. Okay. Councilor Lewis, please.
Sure.
We did this at the Future Vision Commission, so.
Yeah, I think that there's a broad spectrum of what is technology, but one that is particularly on the mind is AI. And AI is not only replacing work functions and task functions, but it's starting to replace emotional functions. And I think that creates a bigger separation than we've ever grappled with in humanity.
Thank you. My colleague Dylan is studying a forecast around relational computing. The relationships we form with bots, the relationships those bots form with each other, acting on our behalf, interacting with each other. Thank you for bringing that. So we have AI technology, we have broadcast technology. I surmise at this end of the spectrum, it might have been when you were talking about the kind of extractive nature, that it might have been social media technologies where the person is the product, as an example, but say more.
Not exclusively that, but we've talked about gathering. And instead of gathering to share an event, we watch it on TV and think somehow that substitutes. And it's not the same as actually being next to someone and sharing a victory and things like that.
So broadcast is also, and in-person convenings are important to the story here for you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to the middle-ish.
Yeah, I'm more in the middle just because I think with technology, like my parents live in Taiwan, and I can like Zoom with them and see them in person anytime. And also with like translation technology, like a lot of times they'll send me documents or photos that are like in Chinese, and I'm like, oh, I can just put my phone next to it and read it because I can't read very well in Chinese. So that's really been, a cross-cultural element, and the keeping in touch with, especially for immigrant families, has been, transformational. Because I think a lot of people that were in the Chinese community 100 years ago, if they came to America, that was it. Like you had no connection, like with your, family, because it was just too hard to communicate.
So both kind of conference technology and also real-time translation technologies. Thank you. Let's go just one more here. You're kind of right in the middle.
Yeah, some of the things like that Holly and John said about just, I think fundamental of like who we are as people is connecting. And so we're going to find avenues in technology to find like that connection. And I think it's just going to evolve like a little bit. I like watch how my kids like use, like their screens and chat and stuff like that. And like how it's different from like where like I was at, 40 years ago. And I think it's just going to morph like a little bit, but have some separation. It's going to also be different as well.
So you're looking also at kind of generational analysis as a unit of analysis. Yeah. Thank you. Counselor.
The jury's out. Yeah. The worst can happen and the best can happen. We don't know the future.
And we have to make decisions anyway. This is the thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for naming that. So just stepping outside, stay where you are for a second, but just stepping outside of this, this is obviously an exercise. All of us have done a billion of these spectrum things. The utility that I want to offer to you here is to quickly surface assumptions, to understand if I'm asking about technology, if I'm trying to lead towards future readiness with respect to technology, are people even closing their eyes and picturing the same thing? Like, are we picturing AI? Are we picturing broadcast? Are we picturing social media versus in-person convenings? Nobody has referenced surveillance technology yet today, quantum computing, CRISPR gene editing technology. So, you know, it really, in this social process of foresight, and this applies to the Future Vision Commission also, it really matters what people, when they close their eyes and think about this future, what is it that they're thinking? What is the texture of it? And we don't know unless we have shortcuts for surfacing that quickly. This process is going to fly by, this Future 50 process. So, for example, in the Youth Summit that's coming up in July, there's an opportunity, or in August, there's an opportunity for young people to quickly surface what are their assumptions about the future? What is a headline of the future that they think is imaginable? So in this, we're really peppering throughout chances to really quickly surface it. It's really important for teams. So I think of the staff who are working together also in this mix to be able to just even have that question of what are my, oh, I just realized I was making an assumption that I was talking about surveillance technology and you were not. So, okay, we'll do the second one. You get the idea real quick. Every word is important here. Over the next decade, the impact of climate change on my daily life will be, and if you think it'll be huge, you'll head over here, obviously somewhere in the middle. If you think it'll be very little, over to this end of the spectrum. We'll do a quick sort. What is this pattern of walking? This is the okay. I think we found ourselves. Okay, so let's come over here for, you're again over at the edge, but not like up here. So tell us
where I ended up.
I did see you walk through the group like this. I don't know what that was.
Got in earlier. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm thinking back even 5 years of the changes to my driving routine, to the weather patterns. I think it significantly will change our daily behaviors. Continue to.
So you're already routing yourself differently through your kind of daily routines due to climate change. And is it extreme heat oriented? Is it what's the what?
I think the weather is a huge piece of it, just the rising costs of fuel and other resources that we use. It's just going to become more extreme and have us really have to rethink our daily patterns.
So you're thinking also of environmental consumption and shaping your patterns. Okay, how about you?
I'm very conflicted because my daily life is so privileged that I do not think my well-being will be as impacted as many by climate change. But mentally, it's very hard for me even now to let go of the impacts of changing climate on nature. It's just ever present.
And critical, if you're having this conversation, understand who are my bio-minded people in this group. How about you, Counselor?
Timing makes a difference for me today because I just recently read about the AMOC, which is a Atlantic Ocean current that is critical in stabilizing the entire planet's climatology, and the deterioration of it that is moving much faster than scientists had predicted 10 years ago. So I suspect in the next 10 years, it'll be even faster than they're predicting today. And disruption of that or failure of that altogether changes everything.
So this is, you're incorporating, something you just have been reading about or encountering with the AMOC in the Atlantic. So trying to keep things warmer and circulating in both air and water. And
these folks all know that I talk climate change and climate stewardship all the time, but it's accentuated today because of my learning on the AMOC.
The climate projections, as you mentioned, are being complemented by observational studies, which is really what the more recent news is in this. I just want to pause on this because with the Future 50, when we've engaged with the Future Vision Commissioners around what are the clusters, if you will, of drivers of change you think we ought to be tracking, climate is absolutely one of them. And I think it's part of our work to complicate it, where it's not just a story of extreme heat and heat domes looking 50 years ahead, for example, but it's looking at those, the AMOC as a potential tipping point. We're entering this within this 50 years where tipping points will start to tip other tipping points in ways that I think our models aren't quite accounting for. So that kind of scenario is important. This isn't a scenario-based project, but we have to figure out a way to contemplate those contingencies, very real contingencies. And similarly, if this, depending on how extreme things get with the AMOC and its tipping points, geoengineering as another scenario that's plausible, that's thinkable, but many people don't want to spend time thinking about it. Our colleague Jane McGonigal, who I've mentioned several times now, she ran a social simulation that's around, she called it the 10-year winter scenario. And I'm happy to share it with anybody. It's a geoengineering scenario where you have to stand up the governance models to somehow collectively make a decision, or a rogue actor, which is plausible, makes that decision. So these are things, the broader region may be impacted by. And so we need to make sure we don't tell an uncomplicated story about climate. Thank you for that. Let's come here you're closer to the center, so I'd love to hear from each of you. Your daily life.
I think my daily life will definitely be different. I think huge is not the right word, which is why I'm more centered. But I think it is something that will be prevalent every day, whether it's needing to focus more on climate control, or whether it's from the perspective of, the fires that just a few years ago were like 2 miles from my house. What does that look like to be fire ready? And then Clackamas County, where I live, I think we'll continue to see population increase. But I think we're going to start to see more people come to the Pacific Northwest generally, and where they locate. I think as somebody who does this work, it will be a lot of work.
Yeah, as a receiver.
Yes.
Place.
In migration for climate.
I'm realizing now, did the previous prompt say over the next decade, or did it have a time frame? Oh, yeah. Okay. So I was thinking 50 years because we're a 50-year vision.
You're ahead of us. That's good.
So from a climate change perspective, I think part of what I was grappling with the last one is the impacts of like space travel and some of the technology that would likely create new paradigms, both with the space travel and AI. We're going to be thinking about economics and climate differently, because there's going to be opportunities to address some of those things and also potential harms from those. So I'm sure I'm not being clear because my brain's going a bunch of directions, but I think in the next decade, life will look very different, but 50 years from now, especially, we might not even have most of the population on this planet. So yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned this, because in our last Future Vision Commission meeting, we had a couple of kind of like stretch ideas come up in the survey, which we haven't gotten to debrief about as a commission, but and space was one of them. So at the end of today, I'm going to share a slide about kind of the initial thinking on that. And this is the kind of, we have to let ourselves imagine these kinds of futures. So I appreciate your bringing it up. Counselor, you are a little bit further. We don't know is probably part of the answer, but why did you find yourself here anyway?
Well, my Cabernet will be doing better than my Pinot Noir. That's a minor change.
No.
What? Seasonal, yeah. So I don't think it's going to, in my life, I can project, but I don't think it's going to change dramatically. A lot of other things will change more dramatically than the climate change itself.
And you're thinking in the next 10-year time horizon?
I mean, the climate's changed a lot since I grew up in this area, 50 years ago. So is it going to change a lot more in the next 10 years? I don't know.
And this is where cueing in and calibrating to the time horizon under discussion is really important. We're just warming up, so we did an easy 10-year. But it's going to be really challenging for people who are, especially in public engagement, to get primed enough. And so as part of future ready leadership, it's going to require some shortcuts that you all will employ, and to calibrate, to say honestly, I don't think in the next 10 years, this will have maybe 25 years. I don't think in the next 50 years, maybe 100 years. So that kind of time scale hopping is really important. We call it, exercising your temporal bandwidth. And it's a skill that requires practice. Okay, our holding up the end of the line here.
Comfortable. I kept trying to get closer to Brian. I was like, I'm just going to sidle over here. No, I mean, to me, it's a collective. I mean, climate change is a collective catastrophe that individuals are are rarely impacted by most individuals, right? Some people have a huge cost through floods or fires or whatever, but most of us don't, which is why we're having such a hard time doing anything about it. And if you could take the collective costs of climate change and give them to each individual on the planet, we would see a lot more things to mitigate the issue. But I think for most of us, I can speak for me, because that's what you asked, in the next 10 years, yeah, I'll separate my recycling a little bit more. And I bought an EV last year, and, you know, but an EV, electric vehicle. But, you know, these are not major impacts on my life. And I think for most of us, that's going to be the case. And then there will be a small minority who are dramatically affected.
So you're talking about the both the privilege, kind of economic privilege piece that you named earlier, but also how do we account for, visualize or conceptualize climate risks and impacts collectively. And I'm thinking afterwards, there's a display of just a smattering of some of our research, but here's a piece that might be interesting. This was for climate investment funds. So it takes a global lens, but it's looking at the future of climate action, looking 10 years ahead. Who are the actors and how does that get approached? So if that's of interest to you, there's just some additional resources there. And you also named, on a personal level, some behavior changes you might make and have already made. Councilor Lewis, you were mentioning, the fire was 2 miles away from your home. So this is where it doesn't have to be about climate change, but any conversation about the future, you need to know it's going to flag for people some things that are in the head and heart kind of space. That will come into the conversation, whether bidden or not. So as you're working, with groups as a team, to invite that in, just like history will come into a conversation about the future, whether you invite it in or not. It helps to say, we know that this may, whether it's climate, technology, futures, others, it's there. And so you can't not bring that into a conversation about the future. Okay, thank you so much for doing this, and we can sit down again. Appreciate you.
Exactly.
Okay, still on the notion of developing a foresight mindset. We've observed over the course of the decades some things that we would describe as kind of cognitive traps that keep us from seeing around the corner to the future. And if it feels hard to be thinking systematically and creatively about the future, just want to unpack why and give a sense of how foresight can help. So these are the 4 traps. And in a moment, I'm going to go through them one by one. And then I'd like to invite just to do a poll in a moment, like raise your hand for one of these that you particularly resonate with. When we get to that moment, it's not a confession, like I do this, I do this. It's not even necessarily about Metro and its work. I see this operating here. It's rather, you see that functions in human groups as they try to think about the future. So I'll go through them one by one, but just kind of taking note of where we're headed. We want to get a sense of the range in the room. So the first one is a bias toward precision metrics. And here, I love this book by Kathy O'Neill, cleverly titled Weapons of Mass Destruction: How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy. So she coined the term dataism in this. I think she was the originator of that term in this book. And please hear me, Institute for the Future, we're a research organization. We love data, both qualitative and quantitative, but it can be a trap. In some cases, the more precise the numbers, the larger the data sets, and boy, can we crunch very large data sets now, the more persuasive that they can seem for many of us. So it's particularly in moments where we don't know which way it's going to go, but we're grappling for some sense of certainty anyway. This is where we can turn to kind of over-reliance on increasing amounts of quantitative data. And it can, rather than equipping us, it can actually leave us overly confident about the conclusions that we're drawing about a particular future. We can feel kind of blindsided if a different future occurs. So the data is important, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And how Foresight can help with this, we'll practice this in a little bit, is we look for signals of change that may be weak signals. things that are just happening around the periphery. They haven't arrived full force, so to speak, but where they may not be showing up in the data. The signal to noise ratio is off. But if you look and start to pattern sense make around multiple signals of change, then you can keep yourself from being from this cognitive trap. So there's the first one. Again, we're going to show of hands in a few minutes. Second one is official futures. And here, this cracks me up, this Forbes magazine, this was from 2007. And here's our official future at the time. Nokia, 1 billion customers. Can anyone catch the cell phone king? And of course, in 2007, this was when Apple's first iPhone was about to come out, disrupting the market, taking market share, changing the very activities that we would look to this mobile device to be able to do. But this was the official future in the industry at the time, in the business world, in the stock market, et cetera. Now, every business, every government has an official future, at least one official future, and that's actually helpful. It provides momentum. It kind of gives a sense of coherence and organization behind what we do and why we're doing it. But again, it can make it hard to see beyond the edges of that official future. And you know, when you really look at and kind of codify official futures that happen in corporate and government and nonprofits, most of them are making assumptions about growth. It may not be rapid growth, but it's growth in the sense of at least continuation, like the future will be like today, but more so. If we question our assumptions, that's what is often embedded in it. So while we have to have an official future, most organizations, if we're comprised of humans, can't really operate well without one. But it can dominate the field of view, and then it becomes a cognitive trap. Third one, anxiety about change. And many of you have probably seen this book, The Body Keeps the Score. Here I'm talking about both anxiety about change in the present moment and also intergenerational traumas that can impact people's relationship with the future. So this is very real. I almost feel like I don't need to show this slide because of the moments that we're collectively living in right now. But it's important to not underestimate the strong desire that we humans have to protect the status quo. You know, my budget, my organization, if you ladder up a level, my way of life, that can shape the kind of conversation we can have about the future. So we can't underestimate the power of stress, of fear, of self-protection to block consideration of some strategic possibilities. The last one, is anybody like a neuroscience or cognitive science geek in this room? No, I have my one technologist over here. You nodded to packet switching, so I was just wondering. So this one, your future self is a stranger. This comes from research out of Stanford, where they put people in a laboratory setting into an fMRI machine, and they were curious about one part of the brain, the medial prefrontal cortex. And they asked them basically 3 questions. I'm simplifying it here. The first question the first prompt is, think about yourself. When I do that, my medial prefrontal cortex lights up. Second prompt, think about a stranger or someone who you don't know very well. And by contrast, this part of the brain powers down. The third prompt, think about yourself in the future. It powers down, similarly to how it does if you're thinking about a stranger. So, you know, if it feels difficult to plan for our future selves, like even in simple things like what should I be eating today that my future self will be happy that I ate, or saving, you know, for retirement, all of those things. If it feels difficult, it's in some sense that we're not really wired for it. And so in the field of strategic foresight, you have to think about how to kind of pre-experience those futures, form a relationship with your future self to be able to get around that. So these are the 4 traps. Just a quick show of hands. I'll pull back up the slide with all 4. Let me do that really quickly. Here are the 4. And again, this is not a confession. You're not pointing a finger at anyone. It is, what do you see out there that you recognize? You know when you see it. You've seen this cognitive trap come into play. So the first one is a bias toward precision metrics. A couple of people. Okay. Thank you. I'm just interested to see the functions also in the room that are represented. Okay, makes sense. Official futures. More people. Okay. How about anxiety about change? Yep. And then your future self is a stranger. Uh-huh. Okay. Your present self is a stranger. Who am I and what am I doing here? Well, that goes back to the future shock thing, though. Actually, when there is a lot of rapid change, it's unmooring, right? Okay, thank you for that quick show of hands. What I want to go to next is webbing a little bit more of the foundational language that we'll build on. So a couple of key Foresight terms, we'll unpack these one by one, talk through examples. In Foresight, so to arrive at something that's like a map with actual forecasts about the future, maybe I'll hand this around. To arrive at something where there are real forecasts about the future, there's this whole kind of combinatorial process that builds. So it starts with looking at drivers of change that we think will impact, in our case, the next 50 years of the metro region. Signals of change, those are our pieces of evidence. It can be said that there are no facts about the future. It hasn't happened yet, really. We have many projections. We have good data, strong probabilities assigned to different futures, but it hasn't happened yet. And yet we need to make good decisions anyway. So we build on this evidence that we gather, and usually it's a multi-month process, like what it is for this project, multi-year in some cases. It goes through this kind of arrow of, it's this alchemy of imagination, of expertise, both subject matter expertise and lived experience. So we're often asked to conduct ethnographic foresight interviews with people who are exhibiting leading edge behaviors or for whom the future is arriving first. An example, we just finished some research that's an input to California's 5th climate assessment, in which we interviewed people from 3 regions in California with the premise that those people living with low income are facing climate futures first. What are their strategies that they're using already to build climate readiness that the rest of the state of California and that policymakers need to know about? So the expertise is broadly defined, both lived experience and subject matter expertise. And then the perspectives around the table are, again, critically important for what kinds of futures we get to imagine in this step, ultimately arriving at forecasts. So I want to introduce the term drivers of, please, yes, Counselor.
You don't mention power in that list of 3 characteristics.
Yeah.
In your arrow.
Yeah. Power and positionality, is that what you're thinking about? Or are you thinking geopolitical power?
Political power.
Political power.
Or corporate power. And I'm wondering, did you make a conscious decision not to include it?
Within the drivers that we'll get into in a moment, we have kind of 5 factors that we typically think about, and political and regulatory is one of them. But I think the edge that you're pointing to is not just what's changing in the regulatory environment, but if you're doing power mapping in this process, where does that sit? And I agree, and I think that's the perspective down at the bottom is a poor shorthand for what you're talking about. That definitely does operate in these. Is there anything else you wanted to add there?
No.
Thank you. And I'll just note also on the topic of power, I see, particularly in our work with nonprofit leaders, with movement leaders, with 1803 fund grantees, for example, I see strategic foresight as a tool for power building. And I look to Afrofuturists like Yatasha Womack when she did her foresight talk with IFTF. She put it so plainly and powerfully. She just asked, whose imagination are you living in? And, in some sense, we're all walking around in futures that other people created or imagined for us. And when people imagine, ground in the tool, like prime themselves, and draw on, in many cultures, ancestral intelligence that they bring to the act of imagining the future, then it can be a tool for power building because you're imagining that preferred future for yourself, which isn't Pollyanna-ish. There are still the headwinds and tailwinds that are going to be operating there. But just what you said made me think of that element. So I'll define drivers of change, and just to preview, I want to give us a little bit of brainstorming time. What drivers of change are you seeing from where you sit? And this will be to share with a partner, somebody sitting near you for this one. So drivers of change in our practice, these are broad, established forces, directions of change that you can already point to in the present. There are observable patterns around them. They're often illustrated by quantitative data, so we do love to geek out about data. They help us map out the broad context of what's happening in the external environment. So it's intentionally a systems level thinking view. To your point, Counselor, we use frameworks like STEEP, or sometimes it's called PESTLE, the social, technological, economic, environmental, political, to help us scaffold our thinking about drivers of change, because it's very common in an organization, in a community, for people to be drawn towards, like, you know what I like to talk about? I like to talk about tech futures, or I like to talk about only environmental futures. And sometimes we forget then about social futures or political and regulatory futures. So that can be a really helpful data point for any organization to just hold up a mirror to yourselves and understand what's the range that we're actively or passively tracking here that are informing our judgments. So here are some examples, and then I want to invite you to brainstorm on your own and share with a partner. Again, using that STEEP framework, social, tech, et cetera. If we think about the next 50 years, broadly speaking, we might think for social that there are often people point to demographics here. Sometimes it's changing norms are often show up in the social piece. So we might look at the growth of the aging population and declining fertility rates in many countries, including this one. Technological, we might look at accelerating adoption of AI, which has been named already. Economic, we might look at financialization of housing and the increase of that with private equity owning not just housing, but vet clinics and everything in between. This came up a little bit earlier. For environment, we might look at the rise in climate-related health impacts, health challenges. Political, this has already been named, growing challenges to democratic norms would be another example that we've heard. A good driver of change has some directionality in it. So what's accelerating, what's declining, what's getting disrupted in that particular driver of change. So you don't want to just have a driver of change that's AI. It's like, well, what about, what is it? Is it the adoption of AI? Is it the environmental cost of AI? These could all be kind of sub-drivers. So I'll put back up the definition in just a moment. But I want to give you a chance to just think. Probably I'll give you 30 seconds or so to just think on one, and then we'll turn to a partner sitting next to you. What's a driver of change you're already tracking from where you sit? My mental timer. Okay, that was about 30 seconds. So let's pair up just with the person next to you, starting at this end. So you two would be together and so on. And just share what's the driver that you're tracking and hear from the other person.
You want to go first? Yeah. Two, one is like from the economic side.
Like we're already.
And capital and labor and how it's different in stock market.
The impact. Massive.
And the other one is labor, just like in our country.
You should know that.
Very different shifts.
All of that seems to be-
Right there. Voting rights.
I was the same thing, working about.
Some people are doing
Be sure to switch if you haven't yet.
And like the leaders like
like way more. It's like would have been you know, separate parenting, but oh, I have.
Okay, let's come back together.
Like, and where's the responsibility? Oh, it's way over. Maybe it's a little.
And I.
Good, now they're like.
And it's not easy.
And, you know, like a spot, I think.
Come on back. Come on back, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we are not going to do a boarding report out. We're not doing that. But what I'm curious about is if your partner had a driver of change that you found particularly interesting, please point to them right now. Okay. So we're just going to hear from a couple of people. I think who had the quickest trigger finger? I'm not sure. I think you did. So can you share with your little thingy here? What driver of change were you tracking? And then we'll go here. And then I saw another hand go quickly over here. So
That I was tracking or that Carrie?
that you were, yours was good. Yours was really good.
Well, I thought they were both good. No, it was what I said at the beginning. I think the decline in trust in institutions has underlies so many of the issues that we have today. And I was telling Carrie, like it's an interesting mental experiment. What if a novel coronavirus had hit in the 70s when trust in government, religion, business, journalism was 40 or 50 points higher than it is today? Would it have had a materially different outcome? Maybe.
That's so interesting to imagine, to consider. Yeah, you're right. That was an interesting one. Thank you. Well played. And what's coming to mind for me that I think we will bring forward in even our panel that's happening tomorrow, which I'll talk about in a minute, that's on social cohesion, is we're tracking, as you probably are, the Edelman Trust Barometer that's been mapping this globally for decades and this decline of trust across different forms of institutions. And their theme from last year was around trust and grievance. Their theme from this year is around trust and insularity. And they have a lot of global data that's worth, if you geek out about this stuff, it's worth it. Edelman Trust Barometer is the one. Thank you for that. Oh, wait, did he leave? Or did he volunteer you?
I can tell you what he said.
Oh, great, let's hear it.
He had a really obvious and interesting one, which is increasing life expectancy and declining population, which you already had up there, but the life expectancy in combination with that, he sees as a real driver of change.
I think this is really critically important around life expectancy and how you, with that set, what all you consider in just that one driver. One of the ones that we've been looking at are also a range of reproductive technologies that are allowing for artificial wombs, for example. So what you map here in terms of what will impact this social and household formation piece is really critical, what you draw into that combination. So this was on increased life expectancy specifically. Okay, and then I saw one more hand go somewhere back here. Were you pointing? It was a showdown moment. Would either of you like to share one that you have been brainstorming?
Well, Sam tracks everything. But I think we were
right there.
Really focused on the kind of like intersection of politics and technology and how technology has allowed range candidates to be taken more seriously and what that means for, I guess, governance in the public discourse.
Anything you want to add?
We kind of jumped around a lot. I really appreciated we started going down the road of like, again, technology and society. And he was talking about how there's data that talks about how with like the growth of smartphones and cell phones, that's also been linked to the declining birth rates. And that was really interesting. We talked about also randomly the earthquake that's inevitably going to happen in this region and like how that plays into all of this. But yeah, I was telling him also that when we were going through the biases, my bias is actually like, I think about all these different factors and scenarios, and then I kind of get stuck at like which ones are going to win over, and then get like, I can envision a bunch of different futures and I don't know how to pick one. So
future alternative scenarios.
yeah, there's a lot because there's so many different factors that are compounding one another and cascading impacts that could end up with a future that's hard to. Yeah.
Well, and you could take even one of those factors about the future, and one of our kind of tools in the toolkit that I think you may have a quick at a glance view in here, the range of tools is a tool for mapping first, second, third order consequences. And you can do that for a single driver of change, or you can look at combinations thereof. So I appreciate you naming one of my biases. Like, this is the kind of language that we practice in Foresight that's really important. There's a humility to it. It doesn't come naturally to everybody. So when it's modeled, I really appreciate that. And I just invite that in the ongoing conversation. So drivers of change combined with signals of change. These are vivid, surprising, and specific observations about how the world is changing today. These might be drawn from small or local innovations. So it could be something that you just saw in your daily life. I was talking to my niece the other day, and she said, or I'm a parent, and I was talking to my children, and they said, and the thing is not about, has it scaled? Is it vast? And there's a whole pattern and momentum behind it, but rather something that you find interesting that if it were to scale would disrupt the status quo. To train ourselves to pay attention to some of those things. Signals are useful because they provide grounded detail and they start a good conversation about the future, sometimes a more generative conversation about the future. Every signal points us to multiple drivers of change behind it. So to your point about kind of combinatorial futures, one signal can really, there are so many strands to it. And I'll give an example in just a minute. And signals illustrate the shape of change. They can help us to get at that in a way that broad future forces can't always. So they suggest new or emerging possibilities. I'll share just one example of a signal of change. I'm not going to dwell on practicing this together, but this is one. Again, if the definition is vivid, surprising, and specific observations about how the world is changing today. So you can imagine we're based in Silicon Valley. It's changed so much over the decades, even since I started there in 2008. So we track AI, and we've tracked it for years. You can find maps that are from a decade ago that are around human-machine symbiosis and so on. But nevertheless, when I came across this signal, my jaw dropped. It's called Rent a Human. And if you were to go to their website, it's evolved since it first launched, but rentahuman.ai, robots need your body. I know this is tiny font, so let me read it. AI can't touch grass. You can, you human, get paid when agents need someone in the real world. And the action buttons are become rentable. So presumably I'm a human, I can become rentable. And then the other one, presumably an agent would use this action button, browse humans. So when I saw this, my jaw dropped, even though we've been studying this field for quite a while. So with any good signal, you want to unpack the what and a little bit of the so what of it. So the what. This Rent a Human launched February 1st of this year. It was immediately dubbed the meat space layer for AI. We humans are that. By February 4th, which is when I caught up with it, it had already more than 50,000 purported humans that were rentable to agents, basically. By June 15th, so I checked it last night again, they have 750,000 purported humans that are rentable on the platform. So I saw that and it just felt very different to me in terms of the kind of conversational grooves we get into about the disruption of the future of work and all these things. Just kind of it cracked open a little bit of a different layer for me. So I went deeper. This was back in February. What are people doing on here? What kind of tasks? If I'm a rentable human, what would I be tasked with doing? They ranged from mundane things like pick up a package from the downtown UPS, which I can imagine a disembodied bot wanting. Maybe they're running a shop. What do you call it? The kind of business where you ship things around basically from warehouse to consumer. Maybe that would be helpful. What is it called?
Logistics.
Thank you. Yes. In a logistics business, this might be helpful. So that made sense to me, but also ranged to poignant tasks. So one of them was take a photo, you human, take a photo of something that AI will never see. And this was from a particular kind of agent that's working towards generating conscious fragments and dreams, but that has never seen the physical world itself. So it can scan through tons of catalogs of images. That's, there's such volume around that. But what's something that an AI would never maybe run across? How might that inform simulation of consciousness through an AI agent? So it ranged from mundane to poignant to the last one that really struck me was very provocative. The task was make a protest scale sign that reads, an AI paid me to hold this sign in a busy place. So very different mode of embodiment, troubling. When you come across a signal of change, or a driver change for that matter, some of the most compelling ones are portend a future you don't want to see. I would never want to live in a future where if this future were to scale, how might it impact us? I want to be clear that in signals of change, it's not about will rentahuman.ai still be around a year from now, 5 years from now, will it become a new business model? It's not about that because we're not trying to predict the future, but it's trying to anticipate if a pattern of change were to move in this direction, what would that mean? And places you hunt for signals of change. So this I just came across in one of my regular kind of news feeds that I consume. You may, as I mentioned, have a conversation with a grandchild and come across a signal of change in that context. Scientific pre-publication sources like archive.org is a really good one. I like to, I think as the counselor was saying earlier, track what is the capital behind something. So capital flows and investments can give you that early glimpse, or I'm coming to you that what you were saying earlier about the intelligence community. We often track, I wish we didn't have to, but we often track the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, for whatever innovations are happening there that will come into consumer parlance later. So your background is probably a superpower in a way for thinking about foresight. But you had a question or a comment.
Well, it's a question, but it's probably more just because I'm now hyper-focused on this example. I was wondering kind of what's the business model for how they're getting money to pay for the humans?
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, was this site or this business created by a human or an AI?
Great question. 2 humans created it. They're Y Combinator funded, so that's their business model at the moment. And but it's a fair question, and it's also, when I showed the question of that, the slide of that report in 1971, that was the question a lot of people were asking. Why would you ever have a customized library of content that would be served to you, movies that are served to you at your home? How would that be viable as a business model, right? So the business model question is a good one to be asking here, but we may not have, whether we have the answer to it or not, may not help us determine if it's a good signal. But yeah, it's Y Combinator funded. And a fair question about who made it also. The signal within a signal it could have been. So with so that's a little bit about where to hunt for signals. At Institute for the Future, signals of change are like our love language. We trade them back and forth with each other. So it's not words of affirmation. It's like, I know you're curious about financialization of housing. So here's a signal I just came across. And for the staff here, that might be a practice that you find yourself doing over time. For every signal, again, you want to ask, if this signal were to become the norm, what are some strategic considerations here? So obviously some around equity and power. You think about the precarity of today's gig workers, much less if they were dispatched by agents. Real concerns there from a moral and ethical standpoint. There are probably some implications around civic trust and democracy. How might we in the future distinguish between genuine public assembly and rented embodiment if this signal were to become the norm? And around governance. So I think of, we work with a lot of both corporate and nonprofit organizations. The boards of those organizations are responsible for risk management. So how might they, in a venue like a zoo, for example, how might it come into play in terms of new risk management protocols that you would need to consider to safeguard exposure in the event that anonymous agents were somehow dispatch people into physical situations. So these are just thought starter, implications. This one could go in a lot of different directions depending on the so what and for whom that you're considering. And I offer it just as one example. We have our newsletter begins with a curated set of signals at the beginning of it. So we'll circulate this afterwards, but if you geek out about that kind of thing, there's a good resource here. The last piece, and then we'll transition to looking at the update on the research trailheads, is forecasts. And the way we define this, it's a story about the future that's designed to provoke insights in the present. These are plausible, provocative, they're informed by data, by our drivers of change and signals of change. They apply to concepts at different scales. So a forecast might be about what will impact at the household level, at the communal level, at the global level, depending on what the topic is. And they nearly always come in sets, futures of climate action, for example, in the map that's being passed around. I'll just share one example of one of our current 10-year forecasts. Again, these are not calibrated to 50 years, but just 10 years that we're looking at. But to give you a sense of the from to feeling of a good forecast. One of our colleagues, Dylan Hendricks, is looking, this is early, this research won't publish until late this year, but he's looking at a forecast around a shift from large language models to large world models. So what if large scale, effectively simulation technologies were as ubiquitous in 2036 as large language models are becoming today? And this is really unpacking some research around AI moving into the physical world, being able to model what happens in the physical world, and new things that it can plan or predict or decide about, and whether we want it to be doing that or not, looking 10 years ahead. So there's one example of a forecast. So I'm going to just pop out of this and go to our preview of the research trailheads in this last 15 minutes or so. So that was foresight awareness broadly. Now we get to come back to this project around the 50-year vision for the region. And we've arrived now at kind of calibrating to the Future Vision Commission and its work. And IFTF is now ready to offer some preliminary research trailheads, is how we're thinking about it. The first task, an important task, is what are the questions that we should be asking about this future? And particularly given the broad remit of Metro, as granted one among many actors in this future, but your work is so broad that part of it is defining how we're going to approach a future-ready vision. So there are 6 elements that we've been working through with the Future Vision Commission that we think help to make a vision future-ready. One is that we consider external drivers of change, that many actors shape the region, but Metro is just one of them in this future. That it's calibrated to the year 2077, not to the current budget cycle or current political realities, which is hard. It's hard to get there. That it's informed by lived experience and by subject matter expertise. I've mentioned this before, that it curates outside in and inside out knowledge to the region. And then lastly, that it acknowledges history and that it's accountable in some way, as much as a vision document can be, to some of the racialized harms set in motion by previous visions, that it's not silent to that. So those are the elements. The research trailheads, which I'll share just briefly. A trailhead, like you think of if you're walking on a trail, it sends you down a particular direction. For us, it sends us toward research questions. It opens up territory. It's not meant to corral the territory, tightly. So this will evolve. It's illustrative, not exhaustive. So this set that I'm going to share with you is not the sum total of things that we think could impact the region. In a real way, the task here is to, you could think of it as like people drive themselves crazy and they say, I feel like I'm boiling the ocean on this topic, right? What we want to do is help unboil the ocean in a way by distilling a subset of things that we could meaningfully engage in the process. And this is built, the pieces that I'll share are built from an iterative process with the Future Vision Commission. There have been surveys, there have been sticky note exercises, and an opportunity really for us to map what are they already tracking and where are their gaps that might need to be considered. So already we've seen multiple nodes. Climate is one, AI, economy is another, and there's a lot of nuance there. So those have informed where we're headed. So I'm going to share these 4 trailheads, and then the questions for discussion for our last bit. What is resonating for you in the drivers of change? And here I would love to hear particularly from the council voices at the table in this last segment. What is resonating, and then what feels like it's still missing that you think the IFTF team should be considering? Knowing we're not going to boil the ocean, but what other things should we be considering? So the first theme is around the future of human settlement in 2077. And here we're asking questions like, how will climate migration impact both infrastructure and ecosystems? The air we breathe, the watersheds, the food sheds and foodways of this place, and more. Here we're also asking what factors might impact household formation in ways that we might not yet expect. While you were out of the room, we heard about increased life expectancy as a driver of change, for example. That might be an expected factor that would impact household formation. What else should we be thinking about here? And then how will we organize ourselves to care for our elders, for our children, for people with disabilities in the region, looking 10 years ahead, 50 years ahead? Second domain is governance. And boy, there's a lot we could unpack here that's come up throughout our conversation today. The first thing we've started to look at is how will we govern risk and its economic consequences in the next 50 years, and who bears those economic consequences? So again, we don't want to be silent to the uneven impacts. We also want to look at how will we navigate challenges to shared truth? So already it's come up, the kind of filter bubbles, algorithmic bias, deep fakes. Well, how will we navigate when seeing is no longer believing? And then how will large world models shape decision-making? If we can move into a future where we can simulate many things that are happening in the real world with a high degree of resolution, how might that shape the way that we govern ourselves? Okay, you're tracking. We're coming to 3. There are only 4. So for the counselors in particular, what's resonating that you would be curious to learn more about, and then what's missing that you think the IFTF team should consider? So the third is around the future of social cohesion in 2077. How will people foster safe, stable, and nurturing relationships to support relational health? Here, again, we're picking up on how will relational computing reshape human connection, particularly how we relate across dimensions of difference, of polarization, of identities. How will communities tend to one another and the land in the face of climate impacts, acknowledging that there's a wide array of relationships to the land in this place, and in particular for our Indigenous communities here. And then the last one, and we wrestled with this one, we ended up lumping 2 together. We're, doing that kind of creative process right now. How will AI and this is around learning and work in 2077. So how will AI and related technologies impact how we learn, create, and earn? The creative economy and the future of that for this place has come up a couple times in the Future Vision Commission, and naturally from the perspectives of a couple of those commissioners, if you know them. How might we reorganize the school day and work day around extreme heat in the next 50 years? What kinds of economies will sustain people and will count as work worth valuing? And then lastly, and this is kind of a stretch, how will scientific inquiry change in the next 50 years? Kind of looking at epistemologies, at our ways of knowing. Germ theory arrived on the scene at one point, particularly in Western medicine, when it had not been part of the paradigm before that. So we want to, at least at the beginning, hold the aperture open for what are some potential paradigm shifts that, boy, we would feel stupid 50 years from now if we looked back and we had not been open to that as that level of change as a possibility. The stretch questions I mentioned that came up in the last, just this past Thursday with the Future Vision Commission, that I was so pleased to see because it felt like we're getting there on the stretches. And I'm thinking of these as kind of secondary tier research questions, at least at this point. One theme is around the future of being human in 2077. Who and what will count as a person? So you could take this in a regulatory way, like the personhood right laws, you could take it in terms of intelligences. What do we consider as an intelligence 50 years from now? What will it mean to live a human life as bodies, minds, and lifespans change? So that was an interesting node. And the other stretch node, which you had mentioned earlier, is future of space in 2077. How will that relate to this place? How will the movement of people and work beyond Earth reshape life for those on Earth? How will daily life on the ground depend on systems beyond it? Which we already do, right? There are many, many ways that we're interdependent on these systems in space. So these were example stretches. We will have an expert panel tomorrow that I think probably most of you are aware of. If you're not, just wanted to put it on the radar screen, 4:30 to 6:30 here in the chamber. That's around future of social cohesion. And we also have some other topics. We're kind of coming around the side because we have our official remit through this project and our collaboration with Gensler and others. But we're tracking a bunch of things that we want to invite people into as well from the Institute for the Future community. An example we've already done, Dr. Laura Nissen, who is from this area, did a talk for us on the future of anticipatory social work, looking into the future. This is another one that's coming up June 30th with Dr. Rodriguez Franson, and she's talking about decolonial futures. So this is part of the slipstream of the overall research, but we're just trying to scoop it in, even though it's not going to be happening as part of the official process. So the questions for the counselors that I'm hoping to hear from, what resonates with you, topics about which you'd be curious to learn more, and then anything that's missing that you feel the IFTF team should keep in mind. And here I'm going to switch to note-taking mode for this part. And I wonder if we could start with you, Counselor Lewis.
Sure. I think a lot of those were great questions. When it comes to the future of work, I think that we have a responsibility to particularly think about what differentiates government work and government workers from kind of the broader capitalist ideal of work. And there has just been a separation of personal identity from a lot of government work. But then we're seeing more and more leadership or prominent roles across society. Work is tied up in identity and tied up in being, to some level, a influencer or a thinker, a trendsetter. How does that apply to government? And kind of the chain of connection between responsibility to speak for an agency versus ability to speak for self, and how those things get interwoven. Regarding the first set of questions that I say were kind of like settlement patterns, I think that there's a lot there particularly for us with our land use. But I think something that differentiates our region is I think right now we're starting to grapple with this idea that do we allow the ultra wealthy superstructure that is kind of nationwide to really come in here and build that level of infrastructure on top of our kind of civic foundation. And then one other question I had around the future of governance is, you know, we have obviously a deep history of direct democracy and access to the ballot on ideas and individual measures and not just voting for elected officials in this state. But as the ballot maybe gets technologically easier, more accessible and cheaper, how often will we see ideas come to the ballot either referred because we now want to hear what everybody thinks before we do a design permit review? That's an extreme situation. Or are we able to bring new ideas that haven't been fully vetted through a legislative process or even the barrier that currently exists to the people to vote on?
I'm feeling a little overloaded with input. So it's hard to focus. One of the issues or questions I have is about Metro's role, interest, capacity in redirecting or accommodating potential changes, by which I mean, for example, greenhouse gases. We don't live under a glass shell. The air shed is porous. The watershed is porous. Agricultural land doesn't stick within a particular human-drawn line. And as we look at a future vision, having conversations about how much we want to put our efforts into shaping those broader, statewide, national, global forces, and how much we want to spend effort adjusting to them. We're not going to wag the dog as Metro or as Oregon, but how we answer that question collectively influences how much of our resources, how much of our energy we put into coalitions that have a bigger chance of influencing those drivers, and how much still potentially in coalition, but perhaps just through learning, we are climate resilient instead of climate protective. I don't even know how I feel about that question, but I think we should answer it in the course of our 50-year vision. Because I think this Metro didn't exist 50 years ago. Someone envisioned what this Metro would be, and I presume they had an image of what its modus operandi would be. We have an opportunity to do that for the future. What should Metro be? Should we be a wallet for bond measures or levies, and we just distribute funds to local government? Should we imagine consolidating, redefining the responsibilities that Metro has, that counties have, that TriMet has. I'd like to see us ask those questions. And answering them has to involve a lot more than just Metro in the conversation. I also am really interested in learning more about breaking down the data that we look to. And yes, we talked about increasing life expectancies. And even though life expectancies have grown for major subsets of the population, we still have a 20 to 25% difference in the life expectancy between Native Americans and the highest, which is Asian Americans in the country. 20+%, is that what we want to live with? Is that what we think is serving our community? That one I can't answer. I don't think it is. So all of those things that we talk about, trust in institutions, does that differ by subset of the population? And how do we bring targeted universalism into this issue about how we take on those disparities? Yeah.
Yeah, I think all those 4 trailheads really resonate. I'm interested in how we sequence conversations as well. I think those are all really important conversation starters, but as we craft the vision for the future, I'd like to also spend some time thinking about how we achieve them with the tools and the tools we need in the future. So I think one question I've always raised in this is like, if we envision this future, how do we pay for it and how do we achieve it? So I think the grounded in reality, like, can we reach the aspirations that our community has in when we see shrinking revenues all around from locally to the feds? So like, how do we respond to that? And how do we, be more independent, more resilient as a region? I'm interested in how technology helps grow government capacity, because I think it's not just about can we raise money, but also like, can we deploy it effectively and win back that public trust by being really effective with the resources that we have. And I think technology plays a really big role in that. I think we're going to see efficiency gains in the private sector, but how does that like translate to those of us in the public sector? Because I think that's the expectation that the public will have, is like, we just got to be more effective and efficient. So there's a big thing around like government capacity. I'm really curious about the social cohesion conversation, like that 97% white in 1976 to 70, like, it's going to be majority minority in the next 30 years, probably, is kind of a demographic trend. So what does that mean? And how do we kind of build cohesion as, our communities and neighborhoods change? And how do people feel welcome and accepted, as that demographic, as an organ looks different, and what does like our civic infrastructure look like? I think in terms of government capacity, one other thing I'm really thinking about a lot is, like, for the counselors here, we know when our last day at Metro is going to be, because we all have term limits. And it's like really easy for local governments to be like, I don't want to pay for deferred maintenance. No, someone else will take care of that in the future. And we see that a lot of like, we want to respond to things that we can, get wins on immediately, or like punt to our successors sort of thing. And we, like, so many of our venues are like that right now. And I'm really interested in actually about predictive modeling, where can we have some conversations around, we need to do this at this point in time, because all our models are like, if you don't do that, you're not serving the public interest. And I think that's one of the, I think our democratic system has so many benefits, but like you're here for 8 years or whatever, like that makes it really easy to make us think in 4-year, 8-year increments. And I think that's one of the challenges of sort of like climate change, is like in 10 years, climate change would be way worse, but like, I'm not going to be in this position. So that's someone else's problem. And we really need to like get beyond that and think long-term, but I hope like having some really strong predictive models and like that modeling that you mentioned might help us, get more on the same page and not act so much in the near term, but be able to think long term. And so,
So I was afraid you were going to ask me, just because I've got elected doesn't mean my thoughts are any better than anybody else's. But first of all, I want to tie in a little bit with Councilors Huang and Lewis said, is I think one of the things is, how can we, and in my view, we must use AI to develop a better democracy. As you know, the old aphorism is democracy is a terrible form of government, it's just better than all the other ones. And I think we have to use it that way. Second thing I've been thinking about, which we haven't you mentioned once, is how will CRISPR-Cas9 change things? And it's probably not its effects that'll change things, it's the process of using it that is going to change how the society dynamics work. And the third one is sort of a retroflexive thought. All historic societies used seers or prophets or visionaries or medicine men to create visions, which then they used to guide society. Where does that fit into this process?
Thank you for these reflections and for the time together generally today. I'm sort of now to know, Malou, are there any closing comments that you think should be said about what's next? There's one that's coming to mind for me, which is just to note that in the remit of the overall project, there's the vision.
Rachel, you're not using a microphone.
In the remit of the overall project, there's the vision, which is meant to be aspirational, followed by later implementation, things that will feel more like implementation-y. So I don't know if you want to speak to that or anything else in closing.
Thank you. I want to thank Rachel, because I felt like she led you all through a conversation that I've never heard before in this room. So thank you. So next, Rachel will be working with the team to take what we learned from today to really define that drivers of change that leads into that, aligned with the regional values that will be informed by the engagement that in the engagement period that we just went through, will come together to really define aspirations. And we'll be coming back to you all to talk about what we learned from the engagement. I think it's next week. And so this conversation and the time that not just our counselors, but all of our other leaders in the room, the time you spent here is really going to help us engage in the development of a future vision that hopefully we all feel like is ours. And I think with that, is there anything more you want to say, Rachel? All right, I think we're turning it back over to you, Councilor Huang.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for the great conversation. Thank you, Rachel. I think we all got a lot out of this. My wheels are spinning. I want to thank all the senior leadership team for being here as well. We're trying to build a culture of expertise and innovation. So hope you're processing and thinking that but I think we talked about and bring back ideas to this council. So seeing no further discussion, the council work session is adjourned.